Okay guys, just a couple things I want to show you to get started on the terrain overlay technique. The first thing we need to do is start inside of our Unity project, import CourseForge like we usually do, and then you're going to need a good height map and overlay. Both Larry and Justin provide a lot of great height maps and overlay on the forums. There are ways to do them yourselves as well. The most important thing when doing the height map and overlay, I'm going to go show you my project settings, is the smaller you can get your terrain. So this is 1500 by 1500. Probably could even reduce it more. The smaller you can get your terrain in relation to the height map resolution, the better you're going to be. That's going to give you more triangles for adjusting the LiDAR map. It's also just going to give you more resolution when working on things. And so in the end, he's provided a good map here, 1500 by 1500, and then the height map resolution is 4097. And then when we come to our satellite overlays, which I put in here is the first paint swatch, you'll want to change your first paint swatch to your satellite overlay. He's given me a Bing and a Google one, and I actually rotate between those because I happen to be lucky enough that the Google one, if we look at it, is maybe in the winter or late fall, and so it allows me to see exactly where trees are, and so I actually rotate between these when I'm planting trees and want to know exactly. The other thing is some of my bunkers are covered up, and so I'll show you this later, but how we can actually take a bunker into Photoshop and then redraw it over our other overlay if it's covered over. So those will be some techniques later. But in the end, first we got to get our Unity project set up correctly. So what you're going to want to do is head to your terrain, and once you've got that imported, scroll to the bottom. You're going to click the cogwheel here. So I don't know if you saw that. Hierarchy, Terrain, Inspector, Cogwheel. Come all the way to the bottom here and look at your terrain controller script. And that's going to be blank for you to start, or it'll say none. And what you want to do is change that to one of your overlay images. In the end, I'm going to be using the Bing overlay, and so you can just drag and drop that, or when you go to select this, just pick that up here, search for it, and then double click on it, and it will be selected there. What that's going to do is every time you recalculate the meshes, that's going to be my first texture. So that's going to provide my color. And so what you have to realize is this image that we're going to later play with in Photoshop is providing all of our color information. The stuff that we're going to do in the layers library is going to provide all of our light, dark, and then our fine detail information. So there's the first thing I want to do is get my layers library set up, which is import my black and white images. But then we're going to adjust the value of things so that when we're looking at this in CourseForge, there's not too much of a color change happening here, because you're going to see when you find stuff on the internet and bring it in and then put it down here for your grass layer, you're going to find it either darkens it or lightens it too much. And what we want to do is get this blended to be correctly. And so we're just working on what I call values, and that's just light dark. Get our brightness, our contrast correct as well, and then we're going to go focus on the color. So right now this is not the finished product. This is sort of an in-between stage where we're just tweaking the light dark. And so you're going to need a custom layer on how to do this. And I know you guys have maybe watched some of the other videos on how to do this. But what you're going to do is you're going to start here on your, it's going to say default, and it's going to say read only. And so you're going to click save as. And then that's going to take you out of here. And you're going to make a new folder, and then you're going to call it whatever the heck you want. I've just done this overlay for the overlay tutorial here. And so it'll make a new folder, and then you just rename the .cfl file, and then you'll save it, okay? And then that's going to basically load in here a library. And so this is my overlay library, and it's going to mirror the default. And then you're going to start importing things into here. So one of the things I did was you can go and look at the link that I'm providing on the forum and download Sluin's textures. He's provided some Marian textures. I found those to be a little harsh for what I'm trying to do, and so you'll have to decide what you want. But I've got this grass detail that I'm editing that I'll provide as well. And mine's just a little softer than some of his. I do like a lot of the textures he does have. So just you're going to have to experiment with some. We don't want everybody's courses to come out identical, but I'll show you how we're going to use these in the layers library. So the first thing I always do is start with the fairway or the green and get that sort of the dimensions on this right in terms of the detail. And so let's just come here and we're going to bring up the green. And so your main color may be dark. I always make these white because you're going to see if we make it white, it's going to allow us to do the editing in Photoshop for the light dark. So I've already kind of done this, but I'm going to show you what you're going to do inside your project here and how you're going to edit it. So you're going to take your grass detail, which in your case may not be a Photoshop file to begin with, and I'll show you every time I resave something as Photoshop, I put this .ps or _.psd on it, and that way it's telling me when I'm back in Unity that's the Photoshop file. It's got a bunch of layers on it. I can edit it. If at the end you want to export something that doesn't have layers and be smaller, you can do that. But let's go into this grass detail in PSD and show you what I've done. So when I brought it in, it started out like this. Maybe wouldn't have had to do too much with this one, to be honest. It doesn't look like, yeah, I wanted to give it some pop. If it's too much gray, you're going to see when we come back in here. Let's save this and see what happens. It's probably going to be too dark. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad, to be honest. What ends up happening here is if we're using these files in this manner, when we save them, the changes are going to propagate here without us having to recalculate splines, which is kind of convenient. You're going to notice here too, in order for the overlay texture to show up, that's my satellite map, you have to have 0 in this first texture. So it doesn't have to be none here, but I usually make it say none in the first texture and then put 0 here, and then it's going to, when you calculate your splines, you're going to see that the diffuse color is going to be provided by the map. Now you'll see here, honestly, it's whatever you've put in your terrain controller. So it's whatever you put in your terrain controller script is going to show up here under your meshes. If I come back here to my paint, and let's just make this, Larry's got this light blue here. Let's just make this that. You're going to see that my textures are still correct underneath here. My textures are still correct even though underneath here is blue. And the reason that's happening is because the CourseForge is picking up what was in the terrain controller script to make the diffuse color. That is different than this paint swatch. I hope you guys understand what I'm getting at with that. So in the end, when we're done with this, though, it doesn't really matter because we're going to spline everything, and I'll show you in my Scioto project that it's not exactly like this, but we're going to spline around everything, and so that really none of this underlay shows anymore. And so anyway, back to this here. So one of the things that we do with our black and white is just we want to make sure these dots are the right size. So you'll have to sometimes build your course out and go in and see if you've tiled it correctly or if you've got to tile it to something different. But I can usually get a vibe that, okay, that's roughly pretty good. And I've tiled this to 4. So you'll have to play with that just a little bit to get that's going to change the grain size of the grass basically. And let's go back into Photoshop. So what I've done here is I'll typically come in and apply a levels to it. What that's going to do is give me a greater difference between my white and my black. So see how I've got a lot of gray in there. I'm going to eliminate some of that gray. And then brightness contrast is sort of my final touch. And that's basically going to help me balance out the color in here if it's too dark. And what I mean by that is, let's just make it, I guess I should show you how I put these in here. Let me just delete these. Okay, so you're going to go to your grass detail and you're going to decide that you want to give it a little more impact. If it's too gray, it's not going to let the diffuse color come through. So I usually start with the levels adjustment. So that's down here on the Pepsi symbol or yin yang, and then you're going to pick levels. And then I'm going to go over here and drag the leftmost dot, and that's going to darken my darks. And then I'm going to grab the most rightmost dot, and that's going to whiten my whites. And then the middle one's going to decide, do I want this whole thing to overall be just whiter or darker? And when these black and white images, we usually want it to be a little whiter. So I kind of like that. And so then we save this and see what happens. Okay, so I've got this texture is providing for my fairway as well. So you can see what I did there. I'm looking at right now just how much light and dark we have. Is there enough variation in the light and dark? And then it also, does it create too much of a tiling pattern? And see, that doesn't really. That looks really good. Let me just show you kind of my small issues with the Marian fairway texture. I really like he's got some nice dots in there. And we maybe go back and create them. I just put that on the green. But what I don't like is, you can sometimes see that tiling a little too much. But it is a pretty nice texture, to be honest. And I think it'll be a nice, I think that would be a pretty good fairway texture. Let's put that on our fairway. It's pretty good, but obviously it's not letting the underneath come through. And so now you have to make adjustments. So maybe this is a good one to pick just so I can show you how you make adjustments. So let's open this Marian fairway, and you see I've saved one as Marian fairway PSD, but we'll start from scratch here. And what I want this to do is when it overlays, I still want it to be closer to this screen and not be this dark. And so let's open that in Photoshop. Let's start where we started on the other one. Let's do a brightness contrast where we're going to say we like the difference between the light and dark. We just want it to be lighter. And so then we're just going to adjust that brightness up and save this. Or actually save as now and call this Marian fairway underscore PSD. And now you're going to see this new file is going to show up in your project. And I already had it, so it's overwriting my other one here. And then it's just going to automatically propagate to here once we have it in. I had the Marian fairway in. So now let's put the PSD in and see how that looks. Okay, so that's much closer. See how the difference there is not so great? So all we're really doing is providing just some close-up detail now. That actually looks pretty good. See how when I zoom out, you can see some of the tiling. That's actually a really good texture. I like it. It just depends how clean of a look you're going for. And you can start to see some of the repetition in it. Especially if we end up putting it down a little bit. Because I think that grass is going to be too big. So you'll have to decide what you want to do on there. Do you want to use something like this, which is perfectly fine. And when you zoom away, you'll see, let's use the main camera on that. It's going to look pretty solid. And then for some of you, for that low camera view, this might actually look a little better than mine. But anyway, the point is here, I'm getting your light and dark correct. And then you're getting your scaling correct. Okay? So once you've got your light and dark correct, let's go back to where we were on these. I'm going to just show you some small little tweaks that we got to do. Put that grass back at 7 for the fairway. So the other tweaks, we're going to just do the rough real quick. And I can show you the bunkers. I have not done too much. Now you'll see that's too bright because I didn't save it. Pretty good. Okay, let me show you what I do here for the rough. And these are all just things you're going to have to eyeball and adjust. I've created another black and white as well, and I did that off of the mesh light rough. So you're just going to open your mesh light rough into Photoshop, and then I'll show you the layers I ran on that. The mesh light rough, it's going to come in, obviously it's green, and you're going to first hit it with black and white. So pick the Pepsi symbol and then choose black and white. And if you don't ever see this properties or this adjustment tab showing up correctly, you've got to come, see how I've clicked on the white square here, that's the mask. If you come to the left of it, that's the properties panel for these. So you click there and then it's going to allow you to do some adjustments. So after the black and white, I did contrast. It's more useful to show you this. The contrast here, the brightness and the contrast. So we did little tweaking here. I wanted to turn down the contrast so that there wasn't as great of a difference between my black and white. You'll see if it's too strong, then you're going to see that tiling more. And then we turned up the brightness a little bit. And then I did an overall levels adjustment to it. And you can see I just needed that to be a lot lighter. And then I turned down. See this? It maybe came in like that. And I turned down some of that, the contrast of it. And then save that out. Okay, so that didn't change much, but just let me show you what happens if there's too much contrast going on with this. You're going to see it blocks out some of the diffuse color, and then it allows you to see too much of that pattern. Now what I'm looking at is just the darker lines, just too much of that for me. Obviously it's too dark as well, which that's easily adjusted, but you'll have to decide if you want that much contrast in it. You could then come back to the brightness if you like that contrast and just make it lighter. So then it's now balanced. I don't like it. It's just like you're trying too hard there. So anyway, let's bring that back to where it was. I think just light touch with these. Okay, that's just a little softer. Okay, and now in that rough layers library, I'm not doing much. You're going to see here I've got 0 in for the first texture, and then I've put this mesh light rough at 10, and then for the semi rough I've put it at 8. I'm actually not even using a normal on it. That's set to 0. You'll have to decide if you want to put on a normal or just light touches on that as well. I find that it's not overly necessary with kind of what we're doing here. And then now, one thing I want to show you is just how we're getting these lines. I put these lines in just to give us some delineation. It's almost like a shadow, maybe overdoing it a little bit there. And I also do it on my tees. Now, my fairways, my tees, and my greens all utilize the same grass detail. And the reason that is I feel like when you at a nice course or they're cutting the grass real low like this is, nice country club, you're not going to have much variation. The greens and the tees are going to be pretty close, nice tight fairways. So just small differences here. You could have, so the tees at 4 in terms of the tiling. You can make, same with the green, I believe. So the green and the tees really matching here. And then the fairway, I think, was at like 7. And so that's just slightly larger grass grain. Now the one thing with the fairway and the tee and the rough is I've added this rough semi color line. And the way I did with that was I went to the rough semi, and then now you'll see with that I do have a normal in on that. That's just the grass normal one. And you can see my values here. I've got a small thickness of fringe coming, and then the rest is just the blend. And that way it's just kind of subtle, but that would add up to about, that's a little over 3 centimeters is what this thickness is there. And I've just darkened the main color on the rough semi color. So what you're going to first do is pick your rough semi once you've got that where you want to, and then duplicate it or clone it, and then rename it something like rough semi color. And then what this is going to do is it's just going to provide the color to this. And so what I did was I just went in here and darkened the main color just a bit. As you know, the other rough semi didn't have a whole lot of color to it. If you look at it here, it is one of the ones I will darken a smidge, and I'll show you. It starts out white, and then you'll darken it to your liking. So if we have it plain white, you're going to see there, there's just not enough of a difference. When I come around the green here, for me it's just too close. I want that rough semi, it's nice watered grass, and when it's cut short it really shows through. So I want a little bit of darkness to that. Not a ton. And then you'll see the rough semi color is slightly darker than that. And so I've added that 0.001 width and the 0.03 blend to my tee, to my fairway, and to my rough semi. And so it's just putting that just on the, it's putting it just on the outside there. So see my layers we've got here in the wireframe. It's putting it just on the outside there. So if you look at your layers, you've got it in the rough semi, you're going to have to add the fringe and the blend, and then to your fairway as well, you're going to add that. Now just a side note, my blend on my fairway is only 0.1, and then on my rough semi I've turned this down to 0.1. I want that to be tight because I don't really need much happening because they're close textures to the texture next door, but I want to have enough wiggle room so tight areas like this don't end up giving me mesh errors. And so one thing I want to show you here is when I've put my splines down, because of the way we have to draw these, I've actually drawing my green inside of the green, and then this outermost part, which is really close to the green or the green fringe, I'm running my fairway line, if you can see that. And then some places you got to just cheat and squeak everything in, or you could move the bunker a little bit. But in the end, some places you just got to make some compromises. And so my green is actually narrower than the green would be in real life by a couple inches, but because of the way we have to draw these splines, if you see this, I'm basically drawing a green spline, a fairway spline, a semi-rough spline, and then just a rough. And in the end, the way this course is cut, everything's mowed the same in the rough length other than this semi, which I think ends up looking nice because then you don't have a bunch of blend intersections And I just think sometimes when we're trying too hard with rough and deep rough and this and that, we start to see too many lines. And then the only other thing in my Scioto, I've added some of these walking, which we'll do later. So hopefully this gets you started in the right direction, and you see what I'm saying. We're going to focus on the color map and all the other tutorials. This one, you're just working on getting your black and white correct, so you're not seeing too much tiling, and then it's also not making this way too light or way too dark. So even this is too bright to me, and so I'm actually going to go make this a smidge darker. My grass detail 1, I know that's making up my fairways, my greens, and my tees, and I still want that just a smidge darker. And this is where you can just tweak to no end. But when we come back here, you'll see it's going to make it just a touch darker. And the other reason for doing this too is when you go into the actual game build, for me, everything's always brighter in the game, just by a smidge. So if it looks too bright here in the scene view, you know when you do a game build, it's going to be too bright. And see, you can see that difference there. And you can do things to turn down your lighting a little bit, where you can adjust the lighting here. But in the end, because I want it to work well on dynamic skies where I don't have control of the lighting, I don't fiddle with this too much, to be honest. And I kind of let it be. And then just adjust my textures appropriately. Okay, so hopefully this gets you at least started in the right direction. Next tutorials are on how to adjust that Photoshop map.